What on earth is going on with Welsh Rugby? I mean, that's a question that would be legitimate to ask in terms of performances on the pitch, but there's far more going on off it, and that's what this video is going to delve into. So thank you for watching. I'm Tim, this is Egg Chasers. And what's been happening? Well, yeah, civil war in Welsh Rugby. You may have seen in the week there was a press conference. Warren Gatland and Alan Wynne-Jones were there, and Alan Wynne-Jones said it is a real possibility that players could strike for Wales' next Six Nations game at home to England. He said it was a last resort, but that option is very much a live one as it stands currently, because they are not happy with the deal that has been presented to them by the WRU for their contracts as players with the Welsh National team and with their regions. They staged a walkout at a WRU function midweek as well, causing great embarrassment to the WRU in front of a bunch of their sponsors. And also at this press conference, Alan Wynne-Jones refused to begin until the Netflix cameras had been taken out of the room. And it was interesting, Jack Conan has been saying that maybe this Netflix documentary might not be as entertaining as everyone thinks it might be. So, I mean, that's for another video, but it seems like rugby at the minute is finding every way it can to shoot itself in the foot. So what exactly is going on here? Well, the issue is that the players are very unhappy with the deal that's been put to them for them and their salaries and their working conditions for next year. Sam Warburton did point out actually that something similar has happened before, and he's backing the players on this one. So in 2011, I think it was just before the Rugby World Cup, the World Cup warm-up games, and the Welsh players, and Sam Warburton was newly captain at this point, and they threatened to strike and not play in the World Cup warm-up games because they wanted a bigger match fee. They didn't think what they were getting paid to play the games was sufficient. And so they used the leverage they had then and threatened to go on strike. Didn't happen in that occasion, and a deal was struck. Hopefully the same will be here. But this is very different, and Sam Warburton pointed out, striking for a World Cup warm-up game is one thing. Threatening to strike for an England-Wales game in Cardiff in the Six Nations is serious amount of leverage that the players have got, because this is the biggest money maker for the Welsh Rugby Union. Some £9 million they would expect to make. So at a time when money is scarce, this is a huge threat, and that just goes to say how strongly the players feel about this one. So what exactly is going on? Well, in a nutshell, how do I put it? Well, so let's talk about the Welsh system. There are the 4 regions, and there are 38 centrally contracted players who are with the national team, who are then contracted to the regions. The WRU pay some of their money at a market rate, a competitive amount that would reflect what they would get if they were to go to England or to France or whatever. So they get a market rate amount of money. The WRU puts in for that, and the regions also contribute to that. The thought being with this process is numerous. I think they looked at the Irish model and thought, yeah, we'll have a bit of that. And how this works is the national team have access to the players much more often and much more easily. They can manage the workload of the players, so they can limit the number of games they play for their regions, because they're buying that right. And also the thought is that you would have these star players in Welsh sides, which would boost up these regions as products that fans would want to come and watch. And that has happened to some degree. I still think in Wales particularly there's a massive heritage in some of those grassroots clubs, like Ospreys for example, Neath and Swansea coming together. These have been bitter rivals for 150 years, and you can't just untie that and make people not feel like they're Neath or Swansea. But it is happening slowly, but not in the same way that it's happened really seamlessly and brilliantly in Ireland. So that's where we are. The headline is these regions are out of cash. They don't have any money. And they're saying the WRU aren't funding us enough. The WRU are saying it's your fault because you've been overspending on players. The issue with the overspending on players is when you have 38 centrally contracted players, which then the WRU can say, oh, no, that player can only play 10 games this season. Well, you've then got to fill that spot with someone else, and that takes money. And this is where the regions are coming into problems. They're not getting access to these players. They're having to spend a lot of money on the peripheral players in squads, and we're in this situation. The Dragons have already gone into administration, and the WRU own them, And there is a conspiracy theory, let's just call it that at this stage, that actually the WRU would be quite happy if the other regions ran out of money and had to be mopped up by them. Are the WRU maybe trying to engineer that situation? I'm not going to make any comment on that. I'll just say that's what some have suggested. So it's also worth just briefly mentioning the whole COVID situation. I think the WRU were awful at getting rugby back going in Wales. I mean, rugby in general was pretty bad. In England, it was bad. But Wales on another level. I know people that play for local teams whose league fixtures have been completely decimated. They've maybe played half a dozen games this season because just the way, the lack of support and the lack of willingness to try and get everything back going again was shocking. And when you move that up to a regional level, it's really hurt them. And more than that, the WRU gave £20 million bailouts to these regions, and they wanted interest back with that money. So these regions are saddled with this money, which they had to take that deal because they would have gone bust otherwise. And they're having to pay that back with interest at a time when their budgets are being cut. So I've got sympathy with the regions. I think the WRU have obviously got an issue trying to get this sorted, and I totally sympathise with the players because what they've been offered is a deal. I'm just going here. They've been offered, and this has been something that's been trying to be done for about 18 months now between the regions and the WRU. But the WRU have come to the players and said, here you go, here's what we got for you. A 20% reduction in your salary. And 80% of that remaining 80% is guaranteed, but a further 20% is performance related. And the players are saying the performance related part is really hard to retain. And also it's not fair that it's only the players that are getting that performance related bit. None of the coaches at the national team or the regions have got that. So in effect, we're talking 30 to 40% pay cut for these players. And some people, it's an easy and quite a cheap thing to say, oh, some of these players are getting 400k a year, they earn enough already. But they only earn that much because that is their market rate. So, and why can't they go off to Japan or England or France or wherever to earn that amount of money? Well, because as soon as they move out of Wales, if they've had less than 60 caps, they're not allowed to play for their national team. So they're kind of being blackmailed here to sign this deal, which they're really not happy with, understandably, because otherwise you can't play for your national team. It just seems it seems to me like the WRU are trying to have their cake and eat it. They're trying to slash the amount of money that players get, and also insist that they can only play for the Welsh team if they stay. And that seems pretty harsh. But also, the top end players on 300, 400k a year, they'll be all right. I mean, I'm not saying it's fair or whatever, but just spare a thought for the person who's on 50k, squad player, who doesn't even know if he's got a job next year. Because that is the consequence. The consequence of these budget cuts and the consequence of the money that the regions have got and the fact that nothing's been signed yet is that still the regions haven't been able to let people know if they will have a contract next year. So it is an absolute miracle that some of these sides have been performing as well as they have in, say, Ospreys in the Heineken Champions Cup. No, given that a bunch of their whole squad don't know what the future is for them as players, especially the ones that aren't on the centrally contracted deals, who could just be gone. It's remarkable what they've been doing. So what do the players want? Well, they want the 60 cap rule gone. Which would mean, if the 60 cap rule is gone, it means players have the choice about where to play their rugby. They may well decide they want to stay in Wales. And we've seen players like Rhys Webb go off to Toulon and then actually go, I didn't really like it, and come back. And weirdly, you find that a bit more in Wales. You find players sort of don't. Lee Halfpenny didn't really like living abroad as well. So maybe they just love being in Wales. But whatever the case, at least they would have the choice. And also it would mean that those players that are currently contracted to English clubs, who the deal is that when that contract runs out, like Chris Chunza, Lewis Rees-Zammit, when that deal runs out, they have to go back to Wales, otherwise they can't play for their national team unless they've got 60 caps. So it just feels all kinds of wrong to limit where players can play and limit the money they can play for playing in Wales. So the players want that gone, which I think seems completely reasonable. They also want the 80% guaranteed money clause gone from the contracts, which again I think sounds reasonable. You can't. I mean, a lot of people do do a job with a base salary and then commission on top, performance related, or rely on a bonus that you get. But to change that now for September, I think it's not fair. And also it does kind of stick in the craw a little bit that the coaches aren't subject to this as well. It's just the players. And also one of the things that's come out, actually, I think it was an article in the Daily Mail the other day, they said that one of the things that's come out is if you sign this contract, the WRU can decide to move you to another region if they choose, and you have no say in it. So imagine you've got kids at school and they go, oh, actually, I know you live in Newport, you're off to Llanelli now. It just seems a bit, it doesn't seem, you can't treat players like that, I don't think. So, but the WRU would have had that choice to do it just like that if they wanted to. And also, if you have a dip in form, they could just decide, the regions and the WRU could decide just to terminate your contract on something, if they don't perceive that you're playing well enough, which is a subjective thing. And imagine the uncertainty. So it's a really horrible situation, and some of these things have to go. The WRPA also want a seat at the table with the negotiations, and Warren Gatland did pipe up and say that he thinks that that's a really good thing. The Wales Rugby Players Association, he said, have been a weak organisation, and that should happen. Warren Gatland said the game will go ahead. He's confident it will. But there was a statement from the WRU the other day that said there's no room for manoeuvre on the overall budget for players' contracts. So they haven't said there's no room for manoeuvre on the 60 cap rule. And I think that is the probable resolution of what's going to happen here. It seems like the smart thing to do all round. The 60 cap rule goes, players can go and play where they want. And the Welsh team, well, I'll get on to why I think that's a win-win, actually, and I think everyone would be happy for that. But it said, the WRU statement said that WRU and regions have been paying salaries their business cannot afford. A new framework is needed. Yeah. It's a short career, rugby. Really short career, and one injury can just change it. And to add even more uncertainty into the mix, I think is really difficult. So just to move on to what happens here, and why I actually think the 60 cap rule going will be a good thing. Well, firstly, the WRU modelled this all on the Irish model. And there's a lot of similarities between the two, but it has not worked. And why? Well, kind of what I mentioned earlier. There's not the same emotional attachment to these teams. Welsh Rugby's got such a rich heritage and tradition in some of these old famous clubs that it hasn't been the same kind of, it hasn't captured the imagination in the same way with these regions. So as a result, they're not getting thousands through the turnstiles like, you know, Munster and Leinster and Ulster and Connacht to a lesser degree. And so they're not able to stand on their own 2 feet in that sense. And that there's a whole number of reasons for that, and there's all the different stakeholders and vetoing of things, and it's just a snake pit in Welsh Rugby with all the different people voting on and having different allegiances and stuff. So there's too much to get into there. But bottom line is, I think they modelled it on the Irish model, which is a good idea, and it's worked brilliantly in Ireland. However, I think they should look at the Scottish model, because I think that's far more where Wales are. They're more Scotland than Ireland when it comes to it, because I think if Wales went down to 2 teams, you could have high quality squads which were reasonably funded. You could also build something over a long term. I know Edinburgh and Glasgow have got the histories that they've always been 2 clubs, and that's the advantage they've got over Wales. But if Wales had, for example, 2 regions, or maybe 3, then I think that would mean the money could be spread so that you actually keep enough players that you want to keep and fund them, and have squads that aren't thin and not able to find players. And you can concentrate your academy money, all of those kind of things. The infrastructure around it can all work. But Scotland, what they do is they say, Finn Russell, you want to go off to Paris and earn £1 million a year? You want Bath to pay you £1 million a year? Fantastic. Scotland still get Finn Russell playing at an elite club, ready to go when it comes to international time. But that £1 million, which Scotland would have to pay to keep Finn Russell, they can invest into the new generation that are coming through. And I actually think that would serve Wales and their national team much better. I know they would miss out on access to players at times. They would have to have players going back to play for their club in the down week in the Six Nations. But overall, it would mean more of that little amount of money and those little resources they have could be concentrated where it's most needed. You don't need the WRU to be paying Taulupe Faletau loads of money. You need the WRU to be using its money to find the next Taulupe Faletau and get him great coaching and great environment to play in and a great team to play in. Taulupe Faletau should be in France or in Japan and coming back to play for Wales. My opinion. And just one example, but you get my point. A player that is in his 30s, coming towards the end of his career, I just don't think it's in Wales' interest to spend £400,000 to keep that player there when that £400,000 could be spent by an English club. I mean, I think Lewis Rees-Sammet's the perfect example. He couldn't get any closer to Wales being in Gloucester. And the WRU know that Lewis Rees-Sammet's getting great rugby, but they're not having to pay a penny for it. And they can spend that money on Rio Dyer instead, so that when Lewis Rees-Sammet's out, Rio Dyer comes in and is ready to go. So I think that it's an absolute no-brainer. Get rid of the 60 cap rule. Think about reducing the number of regions and then pumping up the Welsh Premiership, which is still a really good standard. Some of those old, traditional, 150-year-old clubs with a massive community focus and a massive identity with the people that live in those areas. I think that might be the way to go for Wales. I'd love to know what you think. So do leave your comments and let me know if that's shed any light on the situation for you whatsoever. I'm going to be at Cardiff next weekend for the England game, I hope. And I hope England aren't playing the Wales under-20s. I hope it's a full-blooded Welsh team with a point to prove. And hopefully some resolution on what is a very messy situation. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.